Georganne, we appreciate it. This topic is not really spoken about in mainstream media anyway. I saw the movie American Circumcision. I think that's what
Hmm.
it's called.
Yeah.
And then that's what kind of piqued our interest. And then we started looking, like, even if you try to search on Instagram about male circumcision or follow accounts, you don't really see a lot of it, or any information. So that movie, where especially the parts where it showed the babies being strapped down and velcroed in, was just awful. Those images are sickening. So this definitely piqued our interest, and that's why we decided to reach out. So for our listeners, can you introduce yourself,
Sure.
and give your credentials and let everyone know who we're talking to?
Sure. I'm Georganne Chapin, and I am 70 years old. I've been a healthcare executive for 4 decades, and I ran a Medicaid health plan in New York. I've worked mostly in the nonprofit sector, and since 2009, I've been the executive director of Intact America, an organization that works to change the way America thinks about circumcision. I have a master's degree in socio-medical sciences from Columbia University. I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology, and I also have a law degree. So I'm an attorney. I was admitted to the bar in New York State, but I have never formally practiced law.
That's very impressive.
And my biggest credential is that I have worked on this issue I've believed in it since knew about it when I was 10 years old, that we shouldn't be cutting up little baby boys. And I've been working on it formally for, well, probably the last close to 25 years.
So you said you were 10 years old when you first learned about it. How did that come to fruition?
I had a brother who was born when I was 10, and he had I'd never heard the word circumcision. I don't even think I had ever seen a naked boy. I remember him coming home from the hospital with a bloody penis, and I just thought that was creepy. And then there was a big panic in the family, and he had to go back to the doctor. None of this was talked about, right? And and then I remember my parents coming home, and my mother was very traumatized, and they told us that his penis had closed up and he wasn't able to urinate, so they had to reopen it, and my mother had to hold him while that was going on. So in later terms, my youngest brother had 2 unanesthetized penis surgeries when he was just a couple days old. And it stuck with me, but I didn't really know what it was about. And then, I don't know, a decade later, a little more maybe, people started talking about female genital mutilation. Maybe it's 15 years later. And I thought to myself, well, we do that to boys. Why are we all, I think female genital cutting is horrible, but we do it to boys. Every boy is a target. And I remember getting into it with people I knew, really like liberal public health people, feminists, our bodies, ourselves, female autonomy, and thinking, but we're mutilating all these baby boys. And that's how I got into it. And then I'll finish this quickly. I had a son, 1980. As I've said many times, we no more would have considered cutting his penis than we would have poked out one of his eyes. It wasn't an issue in our marriage. And that's what we did. And we really never talked about it. You don't really talk about, hopefully, your child's genitals as they're growing up. It's not really any more than you would talk about the shape of their earlobe or something. And when he was 18, we were on a road trip, he and I. And there had been a kind of a family. We were visiting some extended family, and there had been like a lot of hullabaloo the day before. All the guys were in the living room, and I had walked in and heard him. He was standing up and he was saying, "You guys just don't know what you're missing." And I realized they were having an argument I figured they were having an argument. So the next day we were in the car, and I said, what was that about? And he said, "Oh, It's unbelievable. He said, these guys they're like the dude who bought a Cadillac and can't admit he got a lemon. And he said, the difference is, he can trade his Cadillac in and they can't do a thing about it. And then he said to me, I never thanked you and Dad for not circumcising me. And I just want to thank you. Mm. And I went there from being aware and thinking circumcision was like stupid, painful, hypocritical, all of those sort of more on an intellectual plane, right? To realizing that it had a lifelong impact, and keeping the body part you're born with, the foreskin. The most important part of our parts are our genitals and our mouth, right? We eat to live, and we have sex to procreate, and pleasure, right? It has to be, both of them have to be pleasurable for people to want to do them, right? So here we were deprived. Here's my 18-year-old son, not giving me any detail, but saying how happy he was to have a foreskin. And I just realized that what we were doing was far more significant than just another kind of, hypocrisy or mindlessness. And that's how I got into it. And then I went to law school, and right after that, I think I was just getting ready to start law school at the age of 47, 48. And I spent my whole time in law school researching circumcision and its legal and ethical and international health law, refugee law, everywhere where genital cutting came up, and wrote some papers about it and met people who were in the movement who had been working on the issue since like the 70s, but I wasn't aware of them. And I met them and got involved. And then when this Texas donor came forward to my predecessor in another organization, she suggested that I get involved. And so I did the initial groundwork to start Intact America, which your listeners should know is intactamerica.org is our website. We're also on Facebook, Insta. We have a great YouTube page, and we're on Twitter, and you can find out all about us. And then we also have another site called circumcisiondebate.org. And we have a Facebook page there too. And that's for people who think they want to know something, but aren't really quite sure, not quite into it, just thinking about it. That's the debate side. We personally don't believe there's any debate. I mean, how are you going to debate someone and say it's a good thing to cut off part of somebody's penis? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Not when you put it that way. I was gonna,
and that's what it is, right?
Yeah. If you say it that way, it should end the conversation. But you mentioned, being exposed to that pretty early in life. Do you think your mother was doing it for religious reasons, or was it just something that everybody's doing, or was it
1950? They didn't even ask. My mother's second husband, who raised me, my father, is anti-circumcision, and yet that was his only son, only natural son. We have an adopted brother also. He said, Georganne, they didn't even ask. We talked about it later, years later. He said they never asked, they just did it. By the mid 60s, early 70s, informed consent, as poorly as it is carried out for this, because no baby consents, and as much as circumcision is coerced, but at least there was a pretense, and a mother's signature, on a consent form was asked for. But in 1960, when he was born, 62, no. And my generation, born in early 50s, nothing. Every man I knew when I was, all my peers, as far as I knew, once I became aware of this, they were all cut. And many parents I've talked to said the same thing, never even asked.
Can you talk about the history of circumcision? When I was looking into this, so I watched the movie and then I went down a wormhole on it. I was reading that at the turn of the 19th century, there was a doctor that said It could cure like migraines. It could cure syphilis. It could like crazy shit that has nothing to do with your penis. Can you talk about how it started? Oh, hey. This podcast episode is brought to you by BCN Supplements. BCN Supplements is a Texas-based company that produces and manufactures everything right here in the great United States of America. The good thing is BCN caters to every single person on the fitness spectrum, whether you're a seasoned hybrid athlete, kind of like myself, or you're a newbie just now starting to pay attention to your health, kind of like Mike. BCN has what you need to make a healthy choice. Lately, I've been using BCN's pre-workout mix, and to be honest, I'm not really a pre-workout guy because I don't like the way most on the market make you feel. You know, the crash and that tingly feeling, but you don't get any of that junk with BCN's pre-workout mix. I've noticed I had more focus during my lifts and more energy to carry through my longer workouts, and that pump you get is just, it's amazing. Drop what you're doing right now and go to bcnsubs.com to place your order today on this pre-workout mix. They got vitamins and they got collagen, and be sure to use promo code CWJM to receive 10% off your next purchase. BCN Supplements, helping build a better you from the inside out.
Yeah, that was like the mid to late 19th century. So 1870s, 50s, 70s, 80s, right? So they didn't know what caused most diseases. And they're always looking for new theories. And there was also, this was the Victorian era in England and the United States, Australia, the English-speaking countries. And there's a lot of prudery. And masturbation was thought to be a terrible thing because it used up the energies of the person, male or female, but particularly male masturbation, because they were spilling their seed, they were, wasting their energy, and it dissipated men's strength, and it took them away from their, the pursuits they should be, their studies and their work and all of those things. These poor helpless boys just masturbated all day. So they realize, and by the way, Jewish circumcision also has a history like that. So Maimonides, who was a rabbi and a physician in the 13th century, said that circumcision helped boys focus on their studies because it was less pleasurable to, they wouldn't masturbate. They would instead focus on their studies. And also girls liked intact boys better. He didn't use the word intact, Maimonides. I don't know what word he would have used because I don't know what language he was speaking in. But that women preferred men with foreskins. And so there was just too much, sex for pleasure going on. And if you wanted to focus on procreation and sticking to your work and your studies, you needed to circumcise the boys. So that's what a number of English and American physicians started doing. And they targeted teenagers, adolescents, because they were the ones who were most overtly masturbating. And as this was taking hold, they had these claims, like you said, like it cured insanity. I had the most remarkable experience with a patient. He couldn't walk, and all of a sudden his hip dysplasia went away. Yeah. Blindness. So it took on a life of its own with all these medical justifications, and that has continued really unabated. So as a solution has been found, or as an explanation has been found for all these illnesses, right? Like tuberculosis wasn't caused by masturbation and couldn't be prevented by masturbation, so it's caused by the tubercular bacilli or something. There would be a new condition or problem that circumcision would solve or prevent. And then as medical specialties developed and the birth process was taken away from women, really, before that you had midwives, lay midwives delivering babies, and male obstetricians took over. They would, drug the mothers, put, immobilize them, drag the baby out with forceps, and circumcise the boys. So it became a medical procedure, which initially was a symbol of affluence because only wealthy women had their babies in hospitals in the early part of the 20th century. And then it moved into the mainstream. By the 1940s, England was giving it up because they didn't have any money after the Second World War, and they had a National Health Service, and they listened to the doctors that said, this is crazy, this is not medically helpful. Subsequently, New Zealand gave it up. Australia gave it up later. Canada is kind of half and half, but the United States, the circumcision prevalence in the world is Muslims first, because they're the biggest group that circumcises, then Americans, and then everybody else, including Jewish people. So Americans we estimate that probably 75% of adult men, let's say men over the age of 25 or 30, are walking around with that important part of their penis missing.
Do you, for the conspiracy theorists out there, including myself, do you think there's an underlying objective with this? Like, do you think, because obviously the cutting wasn't curing diseases. The only thing I could think of maybe is that if it was unclean, you could get a UTI, and it does do some pretty psychological things depending on how severe a UTI is. But other than that, through your studies, have you seen anything that looked a little off? Like,
well, everything looks off about something like this, right? Because it's so devastatingly damaging to half of the human race, right? But the UTI thing, by the way, babies, there's possibly a slightly greater risk of UTIs in intact boys, but there are good reasons to believe that some of that has to do with adults fiddling with the foreskin. There is no epidemiological evidence from anywhere in the world, countries where 100% or not, most men are intact, people aren't dropping dead from UTIs. Washington State, which has a much lower circumcision rate than Illinois, doesn't have a UTI problem among boys and men. So that's also been hyped over the years. And UTIs are much more common in girls than in boys, and can be treated with, $2.15 worth of antibiotics. So let's put the UTI thing aside. As far as cleanliness, a boy's foreskin is stuck to the head of his penis, just like your fingernail stuck to your finger, right? With this synechial tissue. And unlike the fingernail, which hopefully for all of us stays stuck to our fingers, for men, the foreskin over time separates, and it's the hormones of puberty. If it hasn't separated before, it's the hormones of puberty that makes it separate. But its function, and the reason it's stuck to the head of the penis, is for protection. That's to keep pathogens out of the urinary tract. So that is why baby boys have tight foreskins, and that's why even the AAP, which is pretty pro-circumcision still, despite acknowledging it's not medically necessary, even the AAP absolutely unequivocally says a boy's foreskin should never be forcibly retracted. So do I think there's something off? Yeah. Conspiracy. Yes, as with lots of cultural things, though, it becomes so embedded that it's not like doctors are sitting around the table saying, let's go get foreskins.
We want to hear that, though.
Right? Most male doctors in the United States are, because of the demographic, are bound to be circumcised, right? So most of them have likely never seen an intact penis. They've never experienced it themselves. Most of the women in their life, this is changing, especially due to immigration.
Oh yeah.
But and to declining rates of circumcision, although we don't know exactly how much has declined. But most intact men I know, who are my son's age or younger, he's 41, with whom I've spoken to about this, and probably kind of funny, here you're known among your son's friends as somebody who, right? Have said, oh, I met this girl and she was really shocked, that I was the first in tech guy she saw, or she told me the best lover she'd ever had. Like, it's in the dialogue now. It's in the, but what remains true about circumcision is we live in a country where every medical procedure is paid for, even the ones that aren't needed, paid for by somebody. And circumcision is a fee-for-service procedure. Most doctors are intact or pro-intact, and hospitals and the insurance companies and the coding and everything is set up so circumcision is a norm. It's a normal. It'd be like, it's a norm as much as you go into a restaurant and you've got, the forks on the left and the knife and the spoon on the right. And somewhere that started, we don't even know. And if you said, why is that? Someone would say, well, that's our culture. It's like, yeah, but like, why is the spoon on the right? Like, couldn't the spoon be on the left? Give, little kids the silverware and see where they put it, use their fingers, right? So it's just embedded in our society as a normal thing to do. And that's really tragic because it causes so much pain and suffering.
You talked about, it's interesting that America is the one, the industrial country that practices it the most. Let me get my speech here. But even culturally, inside the U.S., I can remember being inside high school, and I'm not circumcised, but I was the only one, and myself and another Hispanic were the only ones who weren't circumcised. So it's interesting, the contrast inside the country. I think it's widely practiced among, white people, and I'm not sure about African Americans, but I don't know any Hispanics that are circumcised. And I've asked.
Interestingly, the circumcision machine does target Blacks and Latinos more. We did a survey a couple of years ago, and we found that the average number of times expectant or childbirthing moms, even in the hospital, were asked if they wanted their son circumcised. And that's from, would you like him circumcised, to you're circumcising him, right? Are you sure you don't want him circumcised? That range, right? Everybody does it. The average number of times it was brought up was 8 per person. And Black and Latinx moms were asked more frequently than white moms. So maybe because they were perceived as being resistant, maybe they were perceived as being like less careful, less clean. All of the judgments, the completely erroneous ideas about what circumcision does, that it keeps the baby clean. I mean, what's clean about an open wound in a diaper? Nothing is clean about that. What's dirty about intact genitals? I mean, girls' genitals are more complicated to wash than boys' genitals. And we don't start, and in fact, countries that practice female genital cutting use that as a rationale. They get rid of all those folds and stuff. So, whatever it is. So then if the implication is, don't you want to be more American? I had a, don't you want your son to be clean? Boys are pigs. They're so disgusting. They can't, you don't want, if he's not going to wash his genitals, you have to teach him how to wash his genitals. Well, the genitals are probably the most pleasurable thing to wash, right? Most people probably don't have trouble with that. So yeah. And this is such a deep topic, we have a conference in Atlanta in August, and we're doing a panel on race. And this is one of the subjects, because where there's prejudice or discrimination or stereotypes and all that, you're going to find that circumcision is one of those things, that's going to come up, So if you're a culture that is being thought of as negligent or dirty or poor or heedless or having excess sexual appetite, you'll have a circumcision narrative that's being laid on that culture. So in the early part of the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th, there was a doctor named Peter Remondino, well-published, head of, I forget what state's medical society. And and there's still a book out by him that you can still get it like on Amazon. He's been dead for 100 years probably. And he calls for universal circumcision of Black men to end what he called the Negro rape crisis. So to stop Black men from raping white women, they should be circumcised. And of course, that's what we're doing in Africa right now. The United States is supporting the circumcision campaigns in sub-Saharan Africa. And I call it castration campaigns. They say that it's going to keep men from getting HIV. They're not even claiming it keeps men from giving HIV to women, but they're not testing the men who they're circumcising, so you don't know if they're HIV positive, but circumcising them and telling them this will lower your chances of getting HIV from one of those dirty women over there. But meanwhile, the men could be. So this is going on now in the third world, and supported by American medicine and public health.
Does it make sex less desirable? Like are you gonna want to have sex less? I mean, shoot me straight. I'm circumcised, right? So
right.
What am I missing out on here?
Well, only your libido, right? So if it's like wanting to have sex, people, that's your libido, that's your sexual desire. But are you missing something? Yeah, you're missing part of your penis, right? And that part of your penis that you're missing, I mean, you're literally missing something, right? So that's not a value, that's a fact. So then you would ask, what is it that part of my body that I'm missing has that I'm missing? And it's nerve endings, muscle, blood vessels. I mean, that would be like, to say you're missing nothing would be like, I cut off, this much of cut off my index finger down to the first knuckle and say, well, you're missing sensation and that thing. Well, no, I'm not missing anything because I have 9 other. Yeah, but you are, because you're missing with this one finger, right? So there are other points of pleasure, but the most nerve-laden part of the penis is the foreskin, and it's double layered, and the inner layer is mucosal tissue, and the outer layer is more like regular skin. And the inner layer keeps the head of the penis moist. The head of the penis does not have the number of nerve endings that the foreskin has. And the foreskin, so it protects the head of the penis. Men who are intact, the head of their penis will be pinker, more moist than the head of the penis of a man who isn't. Did I say that right? If you're intact, right, then a head of a penis of a man who is circumcised. Over time, the penis of a circumcised man becomes drier and keratinized. A layer of almost like a callus builds up. So, and then you're also missing the gliding action of the foreskin. So the foreskin provides, what we call extra skin, and that's why we want to take it off. Think about a turtle's neck. Right? Like, is that extra skin because he pulls it back under his shell and then he pokes it out? Would you remove all those folds from a turtle's neck? I mean, you would completely inhibit his function, right? That's one reason they call foreskins turtlenecks. So yes, you are. Now, what the extent of the damage done to your penis, varies immensely, depending on who did it, how they did it, you know, whether they have beginning of their day or the end of their day, the size of the baby's penis, the shape of the baby's penis.
Let's take a look. Let's see what you're working with here.
You guys can do that when I'm on screen. So
it should have been longer, right?
Bigger, thicker.
So,
you know,
golly.
yeah. Circumcised penises are on an average a fraction of an inch shorter than intact penises.
Oh my gosh.
But you also lose girth, right? Because remember what I said, it's a double layer of skin, and that retracts, that skin pulls back when you're having intercourse or when you're masturbating, but it's still there. It's not been removed, right? So it's somewhere. It's sort of like, you know, when women used to wear girdles, they could squeeze the girdle on, but the blubber would like pop up to the top of the girdle.
There's still some there, right? I'm calling my mom after this. I'm gonna give her a piece of my mind.
Listening to you talk, you know, so I work out and I grab the bar and I'm lifting weights and I develop a callus on my hands. So I imagine circumcised men, like if your penis is rubbing, you know, on your jeans,
your
I imagine your underwear. I imagine you have some type of buildup of something, maybe not a callus, but there's something, because, you know, getting a little personal here, like you said that there's not a lot of nerve endings on the tip of the penis, but I'm very sensitive, like extremely sensitive on the tip of my penis whenever me and my wife are getting the, you know,
all right.
doing the deed, you know.
Are you talking about the foreskin or the head of your penis?
Well, both. Like the foreskin, like you said.
It all works together, by the way, right? That's the whole thing. The whole thing works together, right? Just like you can't really talk about your hand independently, you can, but it works, you know, with your wrist and your arm, and it's all one thing, right? So when you remove a section, you've actually altered the function of the rest of it.
What kind of, like, how is this still going on and so prevalent? What kind of feedback or what kind of support do you get from the general public? When you do these organizations, when these rallies are going on, do people kind of wake up to? I imagine people being very kind of objective to it, especially if they've been circumcised. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. What are you talking about? Like, you're different because you're not circumcised. Like, what kind of feedback do you get?
That's a big problem, you know, because I get a lot of inquiries. Intact America does. You can write to me, by the way, info@intactamerica.org if you have any questions. You know, it's a big deal when with pregnant women, they'll say, you know, I can't believe it. My husband, you know, I want my baby not to be circumcised, and my husband's insisting that we circumcise him. And I can't believe, you know, he's so mean that he wants to do this to our unborn son, you know, and what I've started to say to people is, you know, when you say all the terrible things about circumcision as a justification or as a try to persuade your husband, he's thinking you're saying there's something wrong with him. So just be mindful of that, right? We've got a culture where most men are circumcised, and if you have ever, so defensiveness is the reaction I would describe as the most common among people who don't want to hear this message, right? So who's defensive? You're defensive if you've ever picked up a knife and circumcised a baby, right? Oh my God, how did I do that? I mean, most, you know, people won't say. You're defensive if you've signed off on having one of your children circumcised. And you're defensive if you are circumcised yourself. Like, you know, what's wrong with me? I mean, you might also feel angry, you might also feel victimized, but when you have this culture that this is done on this massive scale, people are not giving it up that easily. You need other kinds of precipitating forces to make people give it up. A big one is funding. So if insurance companies pay for it and doctors sell it, I mean, why haven't cigarettes disappeared, right? Because they're being sold to, and there's an addictive sense, you know, addictive element to it. There are people who actually say that I want to, that some doctors become certainly inured to cutting. I mean, if you've cut, I had a doctor come up to me at a medical convention and said, I'm open-minded and I want to know more about this. And then he said, I'm the only doctor in my town, in my city in Maine. I do like 90% of the circumcisions in my city I live in Maine. And I estimate I've circumcised around 7,000 or 8,000 babies.
Whoa.
Now, I have no idea if that number, that was like, didn't Wilt Chamberlain say he had slept with like 45,000 women or something? I mean, I have no idea, like, I didn't calculate how long he would. You what?
I believe him.
Okay.
Scored a lot of baskets.
Well, I believe this guy that he had done thousands of circumcisions. And I said to him, you're asking me all these questions. Oh, and he told me his son was intact, which is mind-boggling. And I said, you're asking me all these questions, and I'm going to ask you one. Why don't you stop? Why don't you stop? And he said, oh, stopping would be very complicated. So, once something takes hold, it's pretty hard to eradicate it, especially if money's involved, your own penis is involved, you did it to your son, you didn't do it, it's really tough. So, but people are getting tuned into this. For one thing, we're so lucky that we can have a show like this and we can talk like this openly, right? I mean, I know you're not network TV primetime, but still, right? This is accessible. And also, I think that men and women, it's a women's issue too, because women are ambushed at a very vulnerable time in their lives, which is childbirth. And their agency, their autonomy is infringed on. I mean, to ask someone for consent, here, would you sign here to allow us to cut off part of your baby boy's penis, which is going to impact him for the rest of his life and have an effect on his sexuality? I mean, they don't say that. They say, sign here. And a mother could be, very exhausted. Countless stories of women being woken up the morning after they give birth and asked to sign a consent form. But people who hear our conversation, people who watch the movie American Circumcision, people who are just willing to question the status quo, and there are people like that. I mean, I think that's how I have been about many things. There's some people, you guys too, you're social critics. You have a podcast called Curiosity, right? That's those qualities make people more open to facing unpleasant questions and answering them not necessarily to their own favor.
You mentioned cost. I guess I never thought about that. Have you ever estimated the cost of the procedure?
Well, we are now using the figure $2 billion a year.
So there's a market for that then, yeah.
That's a very fuzzy amount because the costs are from the initial circumcision, right? Which could run between, in a very poor state, Medicaid, $75 up to the thousands. If you want like the most prestigious urologist in Los Angeles to cut off part of your son's penis. And then there are also the facility costs, right? I mean, you have a room in a hospital devoted to this procedure. Maybe they do a couple other procedures, but you have in a big hospital, like assembly line circumcision, you have staff devoted to that, right? You have nurses, trained nurses who are spending their time strapping down a baby boy so that somebody else can cut off part of his penis. You have supplies, you have gauze and Vaseline and all of that. Then you have, and this is the biggie that is completely not enumerated, all of the repairs, because circumcision has immediate complications and it has also long-term, but even the immediate complications, cosmetic complication. Oh, I don't like the way it looks. they cut more off the left side than the right side. Oh, well, let's do a revision. So the kid goes back in for another one. What my brother went through, the closing up of the urethra. And then those actually persist into adulthood, some of those complications. And some of them, of course, never get resolved. They're not all fixable. Most of them are not fixable, actually. So I don't think I think we said $4 billion, when you include adult complications. We don't really know. I put in a proposal to a health foundation to calculate the cost in the first year of life of the most common pediatric surgery, which is medically unnecessary. That's how I described it, circumcision. And just the cost to the state of that. And they actually made a special call to me to tell me that they weren't even moving it to the committee because it was too controversial. I just want to know, we want to know the cost. Wouldn't you want to know the cost of the most common and unnecessary pediatric surgery? But I guess the answer was no, we don't want to know that. How
many debauches occur per circumcision? Like if a group of 10 babies are circumcised, is there a number within that 10 that goes wrong?
It depends on who you believe. The American Academy of Pediatrics uses a very, very, very tiny number. Like maybe 2%, so 2 out of 100. But then they say, but they don't, that just depends on how you define complications. And then it also says that risks and complications have never been systematically studied. We believe it's higher than that, a lot higher than that. Perhaps 20 to 30% have some kind of adverse consequence in the first few days of life. How many proceed to functional impairment? How many proceed to, complaints of painful intercourse, bleeding during intercourse? I mean, we get letters too, every time we have sex, my husband bleeds. Hair on the shaft of the penis, which can't be known that so much skin has been taken off that the scrotum has been pulled down onto the shaft of the penis, and that would become visible during puberty when pubic hair and arm hair start to develop. That's one of the most painful and not repairable complications of a too tight circumcision. I like to say every circumcision botches the penis, even the most perfect, cosmetically perfect circumcision. So the answer is a couple billion, in a year, and then from there we really don't know.
I got screwed over, man.
You got,
and I've said that. I said I used to run a managed care plan, a Medicaid managed care plan, and I would say to my colleagues, why don't we talk about just saying no to circumcision? And it's like, well, the state covers it. We're in New York. The state covers it. So yeah, but we don't have to if it's not medically necessary. We're only supposed to cover medically necessary stuff. And I said, wouldn't you rather have that money to spend on dental care for kids?
Yeah.
So say, well, it's not that much money. So let's say it's only $500 million nationally, which we know it's more than that. $500 million give kids a lot of dental care. There are states where there's no dental benefit. No, Medicaid doesn't cover any dental care. Not to mention food, other things that people need, other medical things they need, other necessities of life. So any dollar, and public versus private money spent on circumcision, it's all public money. It's all the people's money, whether it's a private insurance company or the state is still, it's taxpayers' money, or it's money that we as employees pay into an insurance plan, but it's all aggregated funds that could better be used for another purpose.
Are there any concrete studies that really show that there is a benefit to get them snipped?
No.
There's not. I know we glossed over it, but there's no concrete. So
no, every time there's a study, there are people who claim it is, like the UTI stuff, right? But one thing that's never done in the studies that claim benefit is an evaluation of the importance of the benefit in taking into consideration the cost and the negative consequences, right? So penile cancer is more common in intact men than circumcised men. You have 1 in 100,000 men will develop penile cancer. You have 8 in 100,000. No, you have 8 in 100 women that will develop breast cancer, right? So we do these extreme things, cut off part of a baby's penis for a UTI, which can be cured with simple antibiotics, or penile cancer, which virtually nobody ever sees and doesn't happen until someone's 90 years old. And you've taken an important body part that has a sexual and pleasurable function and removed it from someone who can't consent. I mean, if you ask, I don't know, what would a little girl say if a 13-year-old, they said, would you want me to cut off your breasts because, it'll reduce your chances of getting breast cancer? By that point, the girl's probably going to say, yeah, but, I like my breasts. Or if she has a boyfriend, he likes her breasts, right? Yeah. We have a bumper sticker that says 10 out of 10 boys say no to circumcision. So you're doing something for this putative, kind of attenuated bullshit benefit, something that the person who's going to bear the consequences doesn't want.
I think we kind of glossed over this and we didn't really get specific. How much of the foreskin is actually removed? I know that everyone does something different depending on the doctor, depending on the circumstances, but how much skin is actually removed from a baby's penis?
Well, the amount of skin removed from a baby's penis, even if you remove all the foreskin, right? The entire foreskin and the frenulum, which is the part of the foreskin that keeps the foreskin from flopping around, just like your frenulum under your tongue keeps your tongue from flopping around, right? It's from maybe just the end of the foreskin to the entire foreskin and the frenulum. That would be the range, right? Either way, it's not very big, right? It's just a little bit of skin. That's because it's a baby. Baby's heart's not very big either, right? But as the boy matures, the foreskin grows. And the average size of an adult male foreskin, and you have to picture sort of something unpleasant, like let's say it's cut off, unrolled, and opened, it's 2 layers, is around 12 to 15 square inches.
Holy shit.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
So imagine, like, from here, you can't see my arm, but imagine this, right? This, and this. Imagine a 3x5 index card, right? Because that is your foreskin, detached, unfolded, and laid flat.
Yep.
And that's a hell of a lot of nerves, muscles, blood vessels. So when you talk about, it's just a little flap of skin. Well, it's just a little finger too in a baby. Yeah. I mean, the tip of the baby's toe is like literally a snip. You could take it off, right?
Yep.
Of course, foreskin is not a snip. That's a bullshit term, because you have to peel that foreskin back from the penis. You have to insert a metal probe underneath it, go around the head of the penis, slit the foreskin, and then clamp it, and then remove it with a cutting object. So the snip thing is complete crap. It's a procedure that takes probably, not counting strapping the child down and all of that, 10 to 25 minutes. I've had nurses tell me that they saw circumcisions that took 25 minutes with the baby finally passing out, right? So it's a very invasive procedure, and which sticks with many men for their lifetime. They have flashbacks, night terrors that they associate with their circumcision. You or I will never be able to tell them they do. That's what it is or not. But many men say they remember something about their circumcision. It's laid down somewhere in the brain. So that I went far afield from your question about how much skin is removed.
The babies pass out sometimes?
Yeah. So the babies, when you see someone say, "Oh, my son slept through it," and they post a picture of their son on Facebook, and the kid is like this. The kid initially, even the injection, even when they do use anesthetic, which is more common now than before, it's 3 injections into the base of the penis. So think about what that feels like in your mouth when you get numb, right? When they inject Novocaine. And before, recently, most circumcisions took place with absolutely no pain relief. None, right? Yeah. So what was your question? I'm sorry.
The baby's passing out. I didn't know they passed out.
So babies will scream and shriek and sometimes choke on their own vomit, and eventually go into shock, especially in a prolonged circumcision. And this is all, I'm not making any of this up. I didn't know any of this stuff when I was mouthing off about how hypocritical circumcision was. I found this all out after I got serious and became an activist. And in fact, at the beginning, I didn't want to believe a lot of things that I now know to be all too true. I didn't want to believe in impaired lifetime sexual function. I just thought that was too horrifying, to think that people, women are mad at their husbands for pounding them. I just keep on and on. Well, in a circumcised man, the penis isn't functioning the way it's meant to function. So circumcised men need more friction and longer strokes and more resistance, more pounding, and usually for longer. They don't have the same feedback mechanism that an intact man has. And it's very unpleasant. It's not pleasant for the man. It's not pleasant for the sex partner. So, I don't know if I lived in Denmark or Sweden if women complain about pounding, but I know it's a theme in American sex advice columns. And I've done a number of sex podcasts with people who talk about sexual function and sexual pleasure, and they agree that's a complaint they hear often. And, how can you, and then that's the cause of discontent in romantic relationships. And nobody knows why. Why would we know why? We think that's normal.
We talked about the frenulum. And I remember there's a guy in the documentary that says that you can actually come to orgasm just by touching the frenulum. Is the frenulum removed during circumcision?
It depends on the circumciser. Part of it is pretty much always removed, and most of it is often removed, and all of it is sometimes removed. Yeah. But even in men whose frenulum has been completely removed, they report that the most sensitive part of their penis, if they touch it, is the scar where the frenulum was, the frenular scar.
Do they cut at the base too, like on the bottom? Like in a vertical motion parallel? I don't know if I'm going to be able, I'm not an expert on circumcision technique. So you might want to go online and look up some of this stuff. You can find sites, it'll give big warning. But the foreskin, I'm trying to think if there's something I can use to illustrate it. I'm trying to figure this out, or maybe I peed on electrical fence. I don't know which one it was.
So
It's always been a mystery.
Oh, wait, say that. Are you talking about say that again? What's the last thing you said?
I peed on electrical fence.
Did you really?
Oh, well, okay, so this is the foreskin and on an intact man. And so to circumcise a baby or a person,
Pick it up a little
has
bit.
to be cut vertically and then around.
Pick it up a little bit. I can't see it.
Oh, sorry.
No.
It has to be cut. This is, and it's closed at the tip, right? It's very narrow. It has to be cut first it has to be detached, then it has to be cut vertically.
Yeah, I have that
with a scissor, and then around.
I have that vertical cut. I thought it was from peeing on a fence.
Oh, really?
So it never was.
You mean you have it?
I have that vertical cut.
You have a scar.
A scar vertically.
Well, that's okay. That's some kind of a on the head of your penis. You have it on the head of your penis.
No, at the base. Well,
you have a
like
scar
in the middle.
Can you just pull it
so
out?
they must have hit the head of your penis by accident.
Yeah. The doctor said they took 10 inches off me.
Wow.
I'm just joking.
Said,
I wish.
I'm thinking, right. No, you don't. No, you don't wish. I don't know. A urologist could probably tell you what.
No,
there's
something. Yeah.
That sounds like an accident to me.
Or maybe I peed on the fence. I'll just go with that.
Okay, that's good.
I'll just go.
Say that.
Can you?
It looks okay.
Especially if you're from Texas, and you have all those,
Yeah,
all those,
it's a good
livestock wire fences.
It's a good bar story.
Right, but you seriously, if you're interested in this, and you obviously are, and you talk about going down the rabbit hole and getting obsessed. One of you in the podcast you did a couple of weeks ago talk about, it literally becomes an obsession. It does, because it's like, how did I not know this? How could this have happened to me? How could this be something we're doing everywhere? How did I let this be done to my son? How did I, it grips you. I mean, I've been doing this work now, and it doesn't get any less fascinating, because it's really extremely fascinating, the implication, and it doesn't get any less horrifying. In fact, it gets more horrifying. So, spend a little time on some of the internet sites that are, X-rated, that will give you really important information. It's really important to know this stuff.
Yeah.
It's just to think of a little baby, you go, if you have your own, or you just you play with your sisters or brothers, it's such a fragile thing. And to go through such a stressful situation of getting cut and strapped down and just, it's terrible. I mean, even their bones are just, it seems like malleable, like they're just so fragile. So it's to think about that,
right?
Yeah,
and absolutely helpless. Yeah.
Yeah, you never do that. Like if you had that baby in your hands, you would never do anything like that. And so it's like the abnormal becoming the normal.
Right. Well, we also distance ourselves from it, so we use words like circumcision instead of penis cutting, or I mean, that's how the anti-female genital cutting people got into the mainstream, was to call it female genital mutilation. So then you hear these, so we say if what's done to girls is female genital mutilation, what are we doing to? That's not mutilation. That's circumcision. It's like I read a book about concussions among football players. This was when the NFL stuff was starting to break, and people would say boxers get concussions, football players don't get concussions. Like, really? So females get mutilated, boys get circumcised because doctors do it. Completely insane denial about what we're doing.
They should.
And I'm telling you, on Facebook, there are some groups that post. They really kind of troll the internet for people who've posted pictures of their children their babies after circumcision, and they post the quote from the mother, "The little man, held up real well," and you see this picture of this devastated baby. Not a little man, he's a baby, right? Again, let me just mention again, intactamerica.org is our main website, and tremendous amount of information there. Some things that are downloadable. We have Ask Marilyn. Marilyn Milos was the founder of the Intactivist movement. She's a registered nurse. She knows more about penises. She could probably tell you about that scar. And we have an Ask Marilyn column, which we publish weekly. We have a Do You Know and our newsletter, which you can sign up for, where we tell interesting facts about circumcision. Then we also have circumcisiondebate.org, which is our light site. And then all the social media. We have channels on all the social media under including YouTube, under Intact America.
We appreciate it, Georganne. One last question for you. Is there anything that guys can do that have been circumcised to regrow foreskin? I kind of read something that guys can regrow foreskin.
What? All right.
Yes.
Good question.
It's called circumcision. It's called foreskin restoration. And if you Google it, a number of sites will come up. It basically involves stretching the remaining tissue. There's usually a little bit of foreskin, and manually stretching. And there are all of these devices that have been invented to help stretch the foreskin and keep it in place as it's being stretched. And I'm not an expert in foreskin restoration. I don't know that many details, but I know many men who have restored, and you have to keep it up, because if you don't, I think the foreskin might retract again. But I know some men who said, I just couldn't do it. It was too much work. I'm okay. And that's great. I'm good. But I know many men who've done it, who said it's made a tremendous difference. If nothing else, as the foreskin starts to cover the head of the penis gets restored to being moist and more sensitive, as it should be. So you might not have the restored foreskin doesn't have all those nerves that were taken away, but it definitely helps with intercourse, helps with lubricating and softening up the head of the penis. So take a look at it. It's very interesting, and there are, oh my goodness, probably a dozen small companies. These are mostly people working out of their basements, right? Just a cottage industry, but very effective, apparently.
That's great. Well, Georganne, we appreciate your time. We know you have a busy schedule, so we'll let you get back to it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for having me on your program, your podcast, and I wish you the best. And I'll come back anytime if you'd like me to. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and remember, 10 out of 10 babies say no to circumcision. And sometimes if you say that to someone, it's a little less aggressive than saying, why do you want to mutilate your son?
Well,
might be a little better.
We appreciate it, Georganne. You have a good day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.